So we'll talk about the basic non-experimental method approach, and then we'll talk about challenges with non-experimental methods. So the challenges are things that make non-experimental methods difficult. It really seems like one of the easiest things that you could possibly be asked to do. So, non-experimental methods, you go out there and you just observe. But it's notoriously difficult. It's deceptively difficult. And because of this, scientists have actually had to develop techniques to minimize errors made during naturalistic observation. We are going to go through a little demonstration of the challenges in naturalistic observation. So let's see that what's going to occur when the only thing that you're asked is to look for anything interesting. So as psychologists, oftentimes we're interested in unusual stuff. We're interested in peculiar behavior. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch this video. You're not going to get any audio to it, or you're going to get very low audio to it. But we're going to watch this video, and let's see, as a class, how we do to identify anything in this video that looks weird, looks unusual. Let's see if we can, how many can we catch?
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. That's right, madam. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
All right. How observant were you? So, did anybody notice anything weird? Yep.
The bear turned into a knight.
The bear turned into a knight. All right, that's pretty weird. Bears usually don't do that. Yep.
Both paintings changed.
Both paintings changed. So this painting and this painting. So that's 3. We got 3 so far. Let's see how many we can get.
The clock on the floor by his head changed.
All right, that's 4. Yep.
The flowers closed. They were bloomed in the beginning.
So the flowers are closed. They were blooming in the beginning. Yep.
Actually, they were different flowers altogether, I think. But he was holding a...
Okay, so we have a disagreement about the flowers. Maybe closed and blooming, maybe different flowers
yes,
together.
rolling pin. I couldn't think of the name for it. He had a
All right, rolling pin changed. We're up to maybe 7. Yep.
Does the guy on the floor, does his clothes change?
I don't know. You tell me.
Yo, the bear turned into a knight.
Yep.
His position changed.
His position changed.
The animal head is a different animal.
All right, the animal head is a different animal. Anything else? What was that? The curtains. Do you remember what they? All right, so we had a few. We had 4 or 5 where people were like, "That suit of armor used to be a bear," and that he was holding a rolling pin. Right now, he's holding a candlestick, and those 2 paintings are not the same as they were before. So we had a couple of observations. I think we got up to 5. After that, it was sort of like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And in a real naturalistic observation setting, in a real non-experimental method setting, maybe it's this or maybe it's that just wouldn't work, right? We couldn't say things like, oh, we were observing, the depressive behavior of our group therapy session, and maybe they, did more of these behaviors. No, we need to know whether they did or whether they did not. So just to kind of show you how challenging naturalistic observation can be, how challenging these non-experimental methods are, let's take a look at the 21
One does
changes.
not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. That's right, madam. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your
So did his clothes
whereabouts
change?
at
Yes, they
precisely
did.
the time
The
that this
entire
dastardly
murdered
deed took
person
place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering
Yeah.
his lordship's scones.
Was the clock in a
below
different
stairs, sir.
position? Yes, and it was also a
I
different
was
clock.
planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
All right, so it is a little unfortunate that we saw how many changes there were, because if you, when I was asking, did this change or did that change, literally you could almost point at anything. So you could have been like, did the table change? Yes, it did. Did the weapons change? Yes, they did. Did the floor change? Yes, it did. But notice that we only got like 5 confirmed changes that people said, oh yes, I noticed that this was different than this. So this isn't an indictment of your visual abilities or your ability to attend to a scene. This is an indictment of humans' visual abilities. We are not great noticers, and we can't notice everything at the same time. Basically what that's saying is that we cannot just go out and accurately do non-experimental methods. We can't just go out and say, I'm going to observe stuff and I'm going to do it well, because we're not made to do it well. That's not the way our visual system works. So because of that, because of those challenges, because we only got 5 out of the 21 with, what do we got in here today? 10 different observers. We only got 5 out of 21. If you want to use non-experimental methods in this naturalistic observation, you have to use special techniques. Because like I said, there's just too much to observe. It's too complicated. Our minds just literally cannot handle it. So some of the techniques we'll go over here. The first one is called delimiting. And delimiting takes care of the fact that there's just too much to look at, too much to observe. And what delimiting is, it's where before you make your observations, you do a choice of what behaviors you're going to observe. And this takes care of the fact that you cannot observe everything at the same time. So I purposefully, for that demonstration, said look for anything that's weird. Look for anything that's peculiar. I did not do delimiting at all. And what we found was that we missed tons of weird things. We missed tons of changes. If, on the other hand, I had delimited and I said something like, pay attention to the inspector's coat. When you're watching this video, that's the behavior I want you to observe. I want you to pay attention to the inspector's coat. Every single one of you would have said, oh, his coat started gray and then it went to beige. If I had said, don't pay attention to the coat, pay attention to what the suspects are holding, every single one of you would have said, oh, her potted plant changed from this to this. The person, the waiter, the butler's rolling pin changed from a rolling pin to a candlestick. You would have been able to do that. So that's one of the ways to overcome those challenges is through delimiting. So if you were doing naturalistic observation of bullying behavior, right? And you go to a schoolyard and you want to observe bullying behavior. If you phrase it that way, or if that's your plan, we're just going to observe bullying behavior, you're going to miss tons of stuff, and you're not going to do very accurate observations. If, on the other hand, you say things like, we're going to look for yelling, and we're going to look for kicking. Those are the 2 things. We're delimiting the behaviors. We're looking at those 2 things. Then you're going to be much more accurate at noticing the kicking, noticing the yelling, and your observations will be higher quality and more accurate. Same thing in the clinical setting when we were talking about depression. If you're looking for the effectiveness of a treatment, for example, or how much signs of depression in a group clinical setting, you can't just say, well, let's look for depression stuff. Let's just look for signs of depression, because there's tons, right? There's just tons of things that depression involves. So it involves things like fear, it involves things like low mood, it involves things like anxiety, alcohol abuse. So you can't possibly accurately observe all of those things at the same time. But on the other hand, if you go into this setting and you say, all right, we're specifically going to look for indicators of low mood. So we're going to see how often people have a slumped posture. We're going to see how often people look down. We're going to see how many people talk during the session. You delimit it to those few behaviors, and then you can accurately observe and do the research correctly. So just to kind of show you how difficult this really is, one of the non-experimental research that I do has to do with analyzing comic book covers to determine what modes of, what artistic choices and what pictorial elements are used to communicate, for example, motion, right? So here we see Thor, and we perceive that he's swinging his hammer, and it's got action lines, and we have Thor's posture swinging that hammer. And what I did in one of my studies was we would just go through, and this is before I knew about exactly about delimiting, because I had worked as an experimental psychologist for so long. And anyways, me and my research assistant, we just said, all right, we have these 100 covers, 100 Thor covers. What we're going to do is we're just going to look for these 5 pictorial devices. So we had posture, orientation, ground plane, action lines, and multiple. So we had 5 devices. The mistake we made was we're looking for any motion. Just look for motion. Is something moving? Is somebody moving? And she went away and analyzed 100 covers. I went away and analyzed 100 covers. And when we came back and we compared notes, we made errors all over the place. She missed motions on certain covers. I missed motions on other covers. And this is in a static image that we literally could stare at for half an hour if we needed to, and we still made errors because the behaviors were just way too much. So what we did on the second go around is we said, all right, we're going to look for very specific motions. We're going to look for running, flying, falling, swinging, and jumping. Those were the 5. And once we delimited it to 5 motions, we were very able to be very accurate in our motions. And that's where we found things like you will use as many literal devices as you can, but only 1 metaphorical device. You will never use 2 metaphorical devices. And we also found evidence that if an artist drew something that might be confusing, they will oftentimes use additional information to help you explain the relationship about what is going on. So calling Hulk the Green Goliath means that he's not there for peace. He's not helping Iron Man out in this particular situation. All right, so that's delimiting. Any questions on that procedure? All right, the next challenge, reactivity. Reactivity occurs when a subject knows they're being observed. So reactivity is the term for the reactions of the subject when they're being observed. And this is basically the phenomenon that if you know you're being watched, your behavior will change. And we all do this. If you all of a sudden make a person aware that they're being observed, they will change their behavior. We'll take a look at a few examples of that. And then even more subtle, your behavior may differ depending on who's watching. So if you as a child have ever been behaving in a certain way when you were playing in your room, and then you changed all of a sudden when your parents walked in, you went through reactivity. You weren't acting like your natural self. You changed your behavior depending upon who was watching. Now, this is a very important challenge to non-experimental methods, because if we're observing, we want to observe natural behavior. We don't want to observe what happens when we're observing. So if it's different, then we're not getting to the true psychological behavior. We're not getting to the real matter at hand. We're getting to what happens when we look at people doing this particular behavior and that is an issue. So I'll give you a couple examples of reactivity. So the first one with Jane Goodall. In this case here, she was opening her study up to the problems of reactivity, because the fact that she was there, visible, the fact that these primates were aware of her presence could have changed their behaviors. So it might not be the way that they actually act. It might be the way that they act when a human is amongst them. And this is something that happens very often. I'll give you another kind of dramatic example. So this is Daniel House, and she was Miss Canada. I think she might have been the last Miss Canada. So this is her in her, after she won Miss Canada, in her evening gown. This is her, I think, during the swimsuit competition. And that's a better joke than you guys reacted. Anyways, this is her during the parade. So anyway, she won Miss Canada. She's very famous because she got stripped of her Miss Canada title. And the reason she got stripped was she was convicted of assaulting her ex-boyfriend's girlfriend in a bar. So she had two completely separate types of behavior. So when she wasn't being observed, she was assaulting her ex-boyfriend's girlfriend in a bar.
But she has a whole Wikipedia, and that's the introduction.
Well, that's why she's famous. Unfortunately, a lot of pageant winners only get famous for other things that they do, you know. So, but anyways, the biggest point here is that when she was being observed, right, it was all about world peace, children are the future. When she's not being observed, you know, she's punching people out in bars, right? Completely different behavior. So if you want to know what Danielle House was like, what she truly was like, you can't have her go through reactivity. You can't have her change her behavior in order to get to the truth, because they are very, very different. So this is an issue that oftentimes occurs in psychology as well. So two examples that I'll give you that are specific to psychology. One of them has to do with viewing habits. So if you're ever wondering what is the viewing behavior of individuals, pre-streaming services, before Netflix knew every single person and what they were watching, does anybody, what was it, the Christmas Prince, I think was the movie, or the Christmas Princess that they had?
On Netflix?
It was on Netflix.
I think it's the Christmas Prince.
They found that somebody watched that movie 42 days in a row. So somebody was absolutely obsessed.
I saw that. And
yes.
Somebody was like, is this person okay?
Exactly. But that's an interesting behavior, and they were able to pinpoint that. Before these streaming services, when people were watching predominantly cable TV, they had Nielsen boxes. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Nielsen ratings, but that's where they used to come from. So they would put a box in everybody's, in select people's homes, and that would monitor what shows you watched and let people know how popular their shows were. When anybody got a box installed in their house, for the first 2 months, their data was ignored. Nielsen just threw it out into the garbage. And the reason was because they were going through reactivity. So they saw the box, and when they were like, oh man, it's time for the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, they looked at the box and they said, maybe PBS Masterpiece Theater instead, you know? They changed their viewing habits. So they didn't want to know what they think people want them to watch. They wanted to know what they actually watch, so they would throw it out for the first 2 months. Research on physical attraction, mate selection, has gone through a sort of renaissance in the last 5 years. And does anybody know why? What has changed in the last 5 years that has allowed this paradigm shift to occur? It's Tinder. So before, you would go into an experiment and you would maybe get a survey, and they would say, all right, can you please fill out this survey? And the survey would be there, and it would be, what do you find most attractive in a mate? And you would sit there and think to yourself, people are watching me. So, great physical attributes. Oh no, that's going to make me seem shallow. Good sense of humor. Oh yeah, that's something. Nobody's going to object to that. I'm trying not to be vulgar here, but you can imagine, people know. Nobody's going to say things like, well, you know what? For me, got to be blonde, got to be fit, and definitely under 30, right? Nobody's going to say that because that's basically them saying, you know what? Shallow, and also extremely shallow. So they would change their behavior. It was very hard to get actual real data on what people found attractive. Now that they have things like Tinder, you can put out a profile, and they've done these. They've put out profiles and just seen who swipes right, who swipes left on these profiles, and you can see what people actually find attractive because they don't know they're being observed. So surprisingly, they just did a study that showed, that kind of stereotypical cliche that if a woman wants to attract a man, she can't act too intelligent, right? She's got to kind of dumb it down, otherwise he'll feel threatened, or she won't be able to attract him. They did a study on Tinder. Apparently that's completely false. Men don't care. So they made profiles of the same person with a university degree, with a graduate school degree, with no degree, and guys were they did not change. They didn't change their swiping behavior based on their education. And that's important. That's a thing that couldn't be done before, because if you asked anybody in a survey, and the survey said, would you break up or not be attracted to a woman because she's highly intelligent? Your inner self might be saying, yes, I would, but your outer self is going to be saying, I'm being observed, so of course not. Of course I wouldn't do that. And as it turns out, that was true. They actually wouldn't. All right, so that was reactivity. One of the last big challenge, that was the last challenge. So reactivity and delimiting, those are challenges to non-experimental methods. Those are things that can be overcome. So we can't pay attention to everything at once, so we delimit our behavior. We don't want reactivity, so we use techniques to hide our observations, like hidden cameras, like using Tinder. We can overcome those challenges.